Mark, I want to start today with an experiment, a very quick one. I want everyone listening to try this along with us, silently, right now.
Okay, set it up.
Say a short sentence out loud in your native language, something simple. I need to buy some coffee tomorrow morning. Say it in your language. Now, right after, say the exact same sentence in English. Same contents, same speed. Say it right after the native version.
Mm-hmm.
And now, here's the question. Did the pitch of your voice change? Did your tone shift? Did the second sentence come out higher or softer or with a different resonance than the first? Did the shape of your mouth feel different? Did your body language shift, even slightly?
And for almost every bilingual person listening right now, the answer is yes. Something changed. Not because you decided it, not because you were performing, but because your English voice and your native voice are actually two different physical voices living in the same body.
And most bilingual people go their entire lives without ever naming this. They notice it quietly once in a while when they hear a recording, when a friend from their home country teases them about how they sound when they switch languages, when they catch a glimpse of themselves in a video and think, wait, that's not how my voice sounds.
And they assume something is wrong, that they are putting on a voice, that they are being fake, that they are performing an inauthentic version of themselves, and they carry a small, quiet shame about it, as if their English voice is somehow a betrayal of their real self.
And here is what almost no one tells them. The pitch shift is not fake. It is not performance. It is not shameful. It is a specific, well-documented, biologically rooted phenomenon that happens to almost every bilingual person on the planet.
It has a name, it has a cause, and once you understand it, the shame dissolves and something more powerful becomes possible, which is deliberate, conscious control over the voice you use in your second language.
And today, we're going to walk through this completely. We're going to explain the science of vocal fingerprint absorption, why your English voice sounds the way it does, where it actually came from, the three most common source patterns that shape your English voice without your knowledge, and we're going to give you a protocol to reclaim your natural voice in English if the version you have inherited does not represent who you actually are.
Welcome to Side by Side English Podcasts. I'm Sophie.
I'm Mark.
Today is for the bilingual person who has noticed at least once that their voice sounds different when they speak English compared to their native language, who has wondered if that difference is a problem, who has felt slightly less like themselves in English than they do in their native language. We are going to give you the science behind that experience and the tools to change it if you want to.
Stay with us. We have the vocal fingerprint absorption science explained, the three most common source patterns that shape your English voice, why your English voice pitch shift often works against you professionally, the voice reclamation protocol, a role play showing the absorbed voice versus the reclaimed voice on the same content, and a word tour with 6 powerful B2 to C1 words.
Quick comment question before we begin. Be honest, have you noticed that your voice sounds different when you speak English compared to your native language? Drop a yes or no. We want to see how universal this is.
Okay, let's find your real voice. So Mark, let's start with the science. Why does the voice actually change?
Okay, so this comes down to something linguists and speech scientists call vocal accommodation. And when it happens over long periods of time, especially during language learning, it becomes vocal fingerprint absorption.
Explain vocal accommodation first.
Vocal accommodation is the unconscious way humans adjust their voice to match the people they are talking to. You do it all the time in every language you speak. When you talk to a baby, your pitch rises. When you talk to a boss, your pitch often drops. When you talk to close friends, your speech patterns loosen. When you talk to strangers, they tighten. This is happening constantly, below your awareness in every conversation.
And this is universal human behavior, not language learning behavior.
Universal. Every native speaker of every language does this. It is a social bonding mechanism rooted in the same instincts that make babies smile at people who smile at them. And it happens because your brain, when it interacts with another human, wants to signal belonging, wants to signal safety, wants to signal, I am like you.
Okay, so that is the baseline. What happens differently for bilingual people?
For bilingual people, especially those who learn their second language from specific sources during a specific period of their life, something more extreme happens. The vocal accommodation gets frozen, absorbed, encoded, not adjusted moment by moment, but wired in as the default voice for that entire language.
So your English voice, whatever pitch and tone and resonance it has, is not random. It was absorbed from somewhere.
Exactly. It was absorbed from your primary English input sources during the period when your brain was actively building your English voice. And once absorbed, it stays, unless you consciously work to change it. Every time you switch into English, the absorbed voice comes online, automatically, without your awareness.
And here's what almost nobody realizes. The specific pitch and tone of your English voice tells a story about who you learned English from, about which characters and teachers and content shaped your ear, about the linguistic community you unconsciously joined when you built your second language identity.
And for many bilingual people, this story is a happy one. Their English voice sounds natural, confident, suits their personality, fits their professional context. They're lucky. The absorbed voice serves them well.
But for a significant number of bilingual people, the absorbed voice does not serve them well. It is higher than they want, or softer than they want, or more childlike, or more formal, or too foreign in a way that doesn't match how they want to be perceived. And they carry it with them without knowing why into every English interaction of their lives.
Let's actually name the three most common source patterns, because I think when learners hear these, they will immediately recognize where their own English voice came from.
Yes, 3 common source patterns.
Source pattern 1, the teacher voice.
If you learned English primarily from a specific teacher or a specific type of teacher in school or at university, your English voice may have absorbed the vocal signature of that teacher. This is especially common when the teacher's voice was calm, careful, slightly higher pitched, deliberately clear, and gentle, which is how good English teachers often speak to non-native learners.
And you inherit a voice that is careful, gentle, almost pedagogical, which is wonderful when you're learning, but which can be limiting in a professional adult context where you need to project authority, warmth, playfulness, or seriousness in ways that a teaching voice does not naturally allow.
Source pattern 2, the media character voice.
If you learned a lot of English from movies, TV shows, YouTube channels, or podcasts, your English voice absorbed elements from the characters and speakers you consumed most, often the specific ones you rewatched, quoted, or emotionally connected with during your learning years.
And this can result in some strange combinations. English voices that sound like American sitcom protagonists mixed with British nature documentary narrators. English voices that sound theatrical because they were built from actors. English voices that sound overly casual because they were built from YouTube vloggers.
And in professional settings, these voices can feel slightly off, slightly performative, because they were built from performative sources, which the listener senses even if they cannot name why.
Source pattern 3, the compliant voice.
This one is the most psychologically loaded. If you learned English primarily in environments where you were being evaluated, school exams, job interviews, immigration procedures, corporate onboarding, your English voice may have absorbed a specific compliance pattern, softer, higher, more agreeable, more deferent, more eager to please.
And this pattern often persists long after the evaluation contexts are over. Even when you're the senior person in the room, your absorbed English voice can still carry the tonal signature of someone hoping to be approved, which quietly undermines your presence without you knowing.
3 source patterns: teacher, media, compliant. Most bilingual people have some mix of 2 or 3 of these built into their English voice, and the mix is what determines how they sound when they speak English today.
And this is not a judgment. There is nothing wrong with any of these sources. But the point is, your English voice was shaped by them, not chosen by you. And you deserve to know that, so that you can decide, as an adult professional, whether the voice you inherited is the voice you want to keep.
Let's talk about why this matters professionally, because I think when learners see the professional stakes, they realize that this is not a small aesthetic issue. It is a real career issue.
Yes, let me name 3 specific ways the absorbed voice can work against you.
Way 1, perceived authority.
Voices with higher pitch, softer tone, and gentler resonance are consistently perceived by listeners in professional contexts as belonging to less authoritative speakers. This is a well-documented pattern. Fair or not, it is how listeners' brains work, and if your English voice unconsciously shifted higher, softer, or gentler than your native voice, you may be projecting less authority in English than you actually have.
Way 2. Emotional range.
Your absorbed English voice may operate in a narrower emotional range than your native voice. A native voice developed over a lifetime has full access to warmth, humor, seriousness, playfulness, grief, delight, and firmness. But an absorbed English voice, built from limited sources, often has access to only a subset. So you can sound polite, careful, and clear, but less playful, less firm, less emotionally rich, which limits the connections you can build in English.
Way 3. Congruence with your identity.
This is the deepest one. If your absorbed English voice does not match who you actually are, listeners feel the incongruence without knowing what they are feeling. They sense that something is slightly off, not wrong, just not fully congruent. And this small incongruence can subtly reduce trust, because trust on a subconscious level is built partly on the coherence of how someone comes across. And an inherited voice that does not fit your identity creates a small tear in that coherence.
3 professional costs: perceived authority, emotional range, identity congruence. And every one of them can be shifted dramatically by taking conscious control of your English voice.
Which brings us to the voice reclamation protocol, because the entire point of today's episode is not to shame anyone about their inherited voice. It is to give you the tools to reclaim your natural voice in English, if you want to.
Yes, 3 steps. Each one targets a different layer of the reclamation.
Step 1. Record and compare.
Record yourself saying the same sentence in your native language and then in English, back to back. Listen 24 hours later using the acoustic objectivity protocol we discussed in an earlier episode, and notice specifically the pitch difference, the tone difference, the resonance difference. Do not judge, just measure.
And what you will often find is a specific gap. Your native voice sits at one pitch, your English voice sits at another, and the gap is measurable. Once you can hear it clearly, you can start to close it.
Step 2. Match your English voice to your native voice deliberately.
This is the reclamation work. Once you know where your English voice is versus where your native voice is, you can practice speaking English at your native pitch, deliberately, slowly, for short bursts at first, reading passages aloud in English, but using the same pitch, tone, and resonance you use in your native language.
And this feels strange at first because you're overriding an automatic pattern that's been in place for years, sometimes decades. Your absorbed voice will fight you, but with practice, the gap starts to close. Your English voice starts to sound more like you and less like the sources you absorbed.
And the anchoring is what makes the new voice stick, because every time you use the reclaimed voice in a high-stakes moment, you send a signal to your brain that this is your real English voice, not the absorbed one. And over time, the reclaimed voice becomes the new default, automatic, effortless, yours.
3 steps: record and compare, match deliberately, anchor in high-stakes moments. And within a few months of consistent practice, your English voice can shift dramatically toward the voice that actually matches who you are.
Okay, let's do a role play. Mark, set the scene.
Yes, Sophie will play a bilingual professional named Anjali. She's going to introduce herself at a work meeting. First in her absorbed English voice, which she picked up from her early English teachers, then in her reclaimed English voice, which matches her native voice.
Okay, version 1, absorbed voice. Hello, everyone. My name is Anjali. I am so happy to be here today. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you on this project.
And listen to that. Anjali's voice comes out slightly higher than her natural range, gentle, careful, sweet, the way an English teacher might have modeled it. And in this voice, Anjali sounds pleasant and polite, but not particularly authoritative, not particularly memorable, not particularly like a senior professional, just a pleasant person in a meeting.
Now version 2. Same Anjali, same content, but now she has reclaimed her natural voice. She is speaking English at the same pitch and tone she uses in her native language. Hello, everyone. My name is Anjali. Really glad to be here. I'm looking forward to working with you all on this project.
And listen to the difference. The pitch has dropped to Anjali's actual range. The tone has grounded. The resonance has deepened. The phrasing has tightened. And suddenly, Anjali sounds like an adult professional, present, confident, herself. Same words, same warmth, but rooted in her real voice instead of the absorbed one.
And the colleagues in the meeting, hearing version 2, form a completely different impression of Anjali, not because her English improved, not because her content changed, but because her voice is now congruent with her identity. And congruence, on a subconscious level, is one of the strongest signals of leadership presence.
Same Anjali, same meeting. Two completely different professional impressions created by the difference between an inherited voice and a reclaimed voice, which is a difference every bilingual person can create once they know it's available.
Word tour?
Word tour.
First word, to absorb. To absorb means to take in and assimilate something into yourself. We absorb information, we absorb culture, and we absorb vocal patterns from the people who taught us a language, often without knowing we are doing it.
For example, your English voice was absorbed from specific sources during your learning years, and it stays with you until you consciously decide to reshape it. Repeat. Absorb.
Absorb.
Next, pitch. Pitch is how high or low a voice sounds. It is a measurable acoustic property, and the pitch difference between your native voice and your English voice is one of the most common markers of vocal accommodation in bilingual speakers.
For example, many bilingual professionals speak English at a higher pitch than their native language, without ever noticing the shift until they compare recordings side by side. Repeat, pitch.
Pitch.
Next, resonance. Resonance is the depth, richness, and vibrating quality of a voice. It has to do with how the sound waves develop in your chest, throat, and mouth. And a voice with strong resonance is generally perceived as more grounded, more confident, and more authoritative than a voice with thin resonance.
For example, reclaiming the resonance you use in your native language when you speak English can dramatically increase how much authority listeners perceive in your voice. Repeat. Resonance.
Resonance. Next, congruence. Congruence is the state of alignment, coherence, agreement between two or more things. When your voice, your identity, and your communication style are all congruent, listeners subconsciously trust you more. Incongruence between them creates subtle friction that reduces trust.
For example, voice identity congruence is one of the most powerful leadership signals in communication, and reclaiming your natural voice in English is one of the most direct ways to build it. Repeat. Congruence.
Congruence. Next, to reclaim. Reclaim means to take something back after it was lost or given away. We use this word for land, for time, for identity. And the work of taking back the natural voice you had before you absorbed a different one is genuinely a reclamation.
For example, the reclamation of your natural voice in English is one of the most impactful professional projects you can undertake because it changes how every future English conversation lands. Repeat. Reclaim.
Reclaim.
And finally, vocal fingerprint. A vocal fingerprint is the specific combination of pitch, resonance, rhythm, and tone that makes your voice uniquely yours. Every voice is a fingerprint, and bilingual people often have two vocal fingerprints, one for each language, which are more different than they realize.
For example, once you can hear your two vocal fingerprints clearly, you can decide whether they represent who you actually are and reshape them if they do not. Repeat, vocal fingerprint.
Vocal fingerprint.
6 words today: absorb, pitch, resonance, congruence, reclaim, and vocal fingerprint. Every one of them is a real, useful, modern English word that captures something specific about the science of voice and identity.
And every one of them is a word you will hear in professional development, executive coaching, and communication skill contexts. Mark, one final takeaway for everyone watching.
That the voice you use in English is not random. It was absorbed from specific teachers, from specific media, from specific evaluation contexts, during specific formative years of your language learning. And it has been serving you loyally, but sometimes silently limiting you ever since, because it was chosen for you by circumstance, not by your adult self.
And you have the right at any moment to take that voice back, to reshape it, to bring it into congruence with who you actually are.
to reclaim the pitch, the tone, the resonance, and the presence that you use naturally in your native language, so that when you speak English, listeners meet the real you, not the version of you that a childhood teacher or a favorite sitcom character helped build.
And the version of you who has been speaking in English in an inherited voice is not less real. It is simply less complete. Once you reclaim your natural voice, the fuller version of you starts to show up in English. Same intelligence, same content, but now delivered with the authority, warmth, and identity that were always yours to begin with.
Small challenge before we go. For the next 7 days, do the record and compare exercise once, just once during the week. Say the same sentence in your native language and then in English. Record it. Listen 24 hours later. Notice the gap. Do not judge. Just notice.
And once you have named the gap, spend 5 minutes each day reading English text aloud, but using the pitch, tone, and resonance you use in your native language, not the absorbed one. Reading passages, blog posts, news articles, whatever you have, in English, in your native voice.
And notice what happens. Notice how strange it feels at first. Notice how after a few days, the reclaimed voice starts to feel more natural. Notice how when you deploy it in a real conversation, listeners respond to you slightly differently, with slightly more attention, slightly more respect, slightly more presence.
Because 7 days of this practice is enough to feel the shift beginning. Your absorbed voice doesn't disappear, but your reclaimed voice starts to become available, which means for the first time in your bilingual life, you get to choose which voice you use instead of only having access to the one you absorbed by accident.
Drop a comment after the week. Tell us if you did the recording. Tell us if you noticed the gap. Tell us if any moment shifted. We want to hear the discoveries.
Because the moment a bilingual person realizes their English voice was inherited, not chosen, and that they can reshape it into something congruent with their actual identity, is one of the most transformative moments in the entire bilingual journey. The English self becomes a fully integrated self. The voice becomes the person, and the person can finally show up in every room they walk into.
I'm Mark.
I'm Sophie. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to look at one of the most invisible aspects of being bilingual and reclaim what was always yours.
Reclaim your voice, speak as yourself. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.